So, dear participants, I'm happy to welcome all of you at one more meeting of the consortium are around for you, which is Resilience, Reconstruction, and Relief for Ukraine, which is the consortium of four analytical think tanks. This is the Institute of Economic Research and Political Consultations, the Institute of Analytics and Advocacy, Center for Economic Strategy, and Dixie Group. We are holding this event uh, to introduce the monitoring of how we are moving on and progressing as far as structured financial aid programs are concerned and their implementation, as well as organization of key reforms. And also today we're going to speak on how for 2 years we have already been implementing the European Support Program Ukraine Facility. The regulation took effect on the 21st of March 2022, and the program is actually for 4 years. So we are in the quite, I'm sorry, 2024. This is the event supported by the International Renaissance Foundation, and therefore, before we start, let me announce some technical things. We have simultaneous interpretation from Ukrainian into English and vice versa. So please select on the Zoom panel the channel you would need. And also we have the recording of the meeting, so please take this into account. And to all our registered participants, we will send this record later. So we are starting our discussion with the traditional format of introducing the key results of monitoring, the key findings, and let me give the floor to Alexandra Batli, who is senior analyst or the leading expert of the Institute for Economic Research and Political Consultations. And besides discussing the new program of cooperation with the International Monetary Fund, we would also like to speak about the issues of implementation of the commitments within the aid that we're getting from the World Bank. So, Alexandra, over to you. Welcome to everyone. We've got a great novelty because we have added some laws required for getting assistance from the World Bank. Why so? Because we have this aid lagging behind, the same as the Ukraine Facility Plan and IMF Support Fund. And we need to remember that all those institutions do coordinate their aid when they are trying to get clear about certain indicators, certain commitments that could open up the way for us for certain aid. So now we can speak about VPO for DPO for the amount of more than $3 billion US. And the World Bank is really wants to give aid within DPO within the first half year, but the Parliament needs to adopt a number of important laws, which is the law on public procurement. It has been there for a year and a half after covering the first reading, and now it's ready for the second reading. And it meets the indicator of Ukraine facility plan with a little bit further, more delayed implementation in the second quarter 2027. But we need this law in the context of our European integration. The other law is about the security and safety and interoperability of railway transport in Ukraine. We have the European model of security management. Again, this law was adopted in the first reading, but that's a problem. It had not yet been covered within the second reading. The third law is about the energy market integration. Again, this is our debt from last year because of which we're not getting new money. And we can see that the World Bank is kind of enhancing what we need to do. It's difficult to do this, but we need to do this because besides the money of the European Union, we could also get the money from the World Bank. And the other important law is the so-called SEPA law on the Common European Payment Space, which has been prepared. It's called Financial Non or Visa-Free regime. This is the law which will allow businesses and citizens to save some money while holding some operations with the EU. and this is also important. We need to bear it in mind that four draft laws are in line with the European integration process. That's why they fully correspond to our state policy. Therefore, I hope that the Parliament will finally adopt those laws. When we're talking about the new IMF program, the positive news is the board of the IMF has already adopted the decision about the new 4-year program for Ukraine in the amount of 8.1 billion US dollars. And the key thing is not the amount, but the fact that this is a part of the aid package amounting to 136.5 billion US dollars, which means that this is a core for our getting aid from other partners. We have to adopt on 1.5 US dollars at a time, but we failed to fulfill our promises that we gave to IMF in this autumn time, and that's why some events have been transferred onto structural beacons. The previous measures were adoption of the state budget for the year 2026, the resolution of the Cabinet of Ministers saying that assessment of suggestions in public procurement will be taken into account with no account of VAT, and this is done to make the conditions equal in terms of competition for businesses and for sole proprietors that do not pay VAT, and also the draft labor code with the updated definition of hired labor. It's important because these criteria will predetermine how a certain worker is a hired worker and cannot work as sole proprietor. 12 structural beacons have been identified. Some say that it's too little, but since that is for the year's time, this is not that little. While revising them, the IMF will be adding up new structural beacons, but the important thing is that the memorandum also sets a number of commitments as well as a number of quantitative indicators. The number of structural beacons have been inherited, a number of beacons have been inherited from the previous program that we didn't implement. Let's say we have the strategy which has not been adopted regarding the National Commission on Securities Papers and Stock Market. And now we have as the deadline the end of December 2026, though it used to be January 2025. And another important beacon is curbing the restrictions for a public investment management plans. There are also some other standards like property assessment, NERC external assessment, so they are less important in this context. A year ago, we also discussed another structural beacon. Probably you do remember this, which is provided in the end of the slide. So all in all, we have 12 structural beacons. One of them we have already filed to um, fulfill. This is the intensification of the process of appointment of the members of supervisory boards. And there are two structural beacons that are risky, which is one regarding the package of tax measures by the end of March, 2026. So there is a risk of delay because this one is not yet in the parliament, and also submission of changes to the tax code by the end of June 2026. If we speak about canceling benefits for VAT payment, taxation of digital platforms, so here we are also facing a risk. And also the one related to the permanent rate of the military tax at the rate of 6% by the actually for all the time, because we will need to do recovery and reconstruction. The program is to be revised by June, so this means that we have this time until June, and we hope that a lot of those things will be performed. Another risky law is the one that we had to adopt by the end of June, mentioned by me. So this is the amendments to the tax code regarding transport pricing. And here we also face some risks. If you're interested in more detailed information and the annex where we have the description of what is required from us, you may have a look at them, but it's also important to have a look at the commitments, which are not structural beacons, but we have to fulfill them. This is regular approval of the parameters of the budget declaration and the state budget, also restricting the possibilities for applying simplified taxation systems. We are supposed to have another draft law by the end of 2026. Another one is further implementation of the public investment management system reform, because that was our beacon that we were supposed to complete by the end of last year, but now it's going to be just our commitment. Also, it's envisaged that the pension reform is coming, but we don't have the timeline. Then approval of different draft laws on capital market, corporate management, liberalization of the energy market. And as far as energy market liberalization draft law is concerned, well, this is also one of the indicators in Ukraine facility, liberalization of prices in the market and so on and so forth. And we are talking not just about commitments related to electricity, but to heating and to gas as well. Therefore, we may well expect that, in fact, the moratorium will be cancelled as envisaged by the Ukraine facility plan, and that actually goes hand in hand with the previous ones mentioned by me. But we discussed tariffs last August, so you may have a look at this. It's also important that the new program of the IMF was criticized because there are not many anti-corruption activities there. But again, as far as anti-corruption is concerned, a lot of attention is paid to them in our commitments related to European integration, which is our fundamental cluster. But again, the memorandum clearly envisages that the National Bank will stay independent. There will be a specialized anti-corruption prosecution office working, and a high anti-corruption court. So court is also supposed to work independently in terms of its operational activity. Here is the map of fulfillment of structural beacons. You can see a lot of them in fiscal sector, financial sector, but these are only structural beacons with no commitments. Thank you, Alexandra. Let me also give you a clarifying question. How will the fund assess the commitments that are not structural beacons? Because it's clear that this will not actually affect the decision regarding provision of aid, but how will this assessment be made? Okay, thank you for the question, but in fact, it's not quite clear because the IMF is assessing both structural beacons and commitments. And if we delay with some commitments, they will quickly turn into structural beacons if the IMF really sees that we do not fulfill those commitments. These are also our commitments that we have to fulfill. And I forgot to mention that we have also got some quantitative parameters that we need to comply with to successfully go through the revision of the program. Okay, thank you. So for those who have joined us, let me remind you of some technical things. So first of all, we do have interpretation. Therefore, if you need to listen to us in the interpretation, choose the right channel. And I've also forgotten to mention that you have a chance to ask questions in the Q&A session. So please use this Q&A box, which is the function in the menu, or you may write your questions in the chat, and we will be happy to answer your questions. We will readdress your questions to our participants. So we're now waiting for Vladislav Rashkovan, who is supposed to join us. But in the meantime, colleagues, please make Vladislav a panelist because he's going to speak now. And while all the technical settings are being arranged, let me remind you that Vladislav Rashkovan is the Deputy Executive Director of the IMF from Ukraine, and there he represents the interests of 16 countries, including Ukraine. So it's really important for us that he has found some time to join us while staying in a different time zone. So colleagues, please make Vladislav panelist. Vladislav, welcome. Yes, good afternoon. So we can hear you, we can see you. Sorry for your technical delay. So over to you. Yes, sorry for my being a little bit late for the meeting. So I'm happy to welcome you, Vladislav, and Alexandra has already presented the new MF program with its structural beacons and commitments that are also included into the memorandum. And my question for you is related to how the IMF is being transformed at the moment. And let me ask you whether Ukraine is a unique case for the sake of which they have taken some specific changes, or is it already a trend with the IMF? And if we keep working with the IMF, so what should we probably pay more attention to in order to maintain the high level of trust that we have and to develop it further? If you allow me to show some slides, just one slide, in fact. Yes, we can see the slide. Well, first of all, thanks you for what you're doing. As you know, for many years, we have been working together for people, experts, generalists in Ukraine to better understand how the IMF programs and the EU program function. And I'm grateful to Alexandra for what she is doing in terms of explanations and clarifications. And let me explain that, in fact, the IMF programs are not only about conditionalities or structural benchmarks and beacons. Or some quantitative indicators. When we were preparing this program, I wouldn't say it was that easy, but to have it approved last week, we actually had to put together several parts of the puzzle. Roman, you have asked me whether this program is a unique one for the world and for the IMF. In fact, yes. I've already mentioned it a couple of times that the IMF has never been funding countries at war. Normally, the IMF comes after the war. When the war is over, the IMF comes to fix some issues related to inflation, devaluation, macroeconomic stability, banking sector, and so on. And in fact, what we have currently got in Ukraine, starting with 2023 or 2022 even, is a unique case. However, being unique, it's at the same time an object of criticism, and I will tell you why in a moment. And this has also been is discussed at the meeting of the IMF board. So, what makes this program unique? As you understand, war by itself is a shock, and the IMF really works with shocks, but the war is different from, let's say, the wrong policy inside the country when the government is making some mistakes and then economic problems arise. The whole problem here is that war by itself is an external exogenic factor which is out of the boundaries of where the government may actually impact the situation, the same as the national bank. I mean that the government and the national bank can be developing policies and trying to implement them, but this does not change the fact of the war because war is actually an exogenous external factor. So when such an external factor exists, the possibility for including this external factor into the perimeter of the IMF's policy is something that makes this case a unique case for Ukraine. We have many wars in Ukraine in the world now, and in many countries we have wars, and these countries ask, why don't you provide funding to us? Let's say Yemen, Burkina Faso, or Mali, or any other countries. So there are many cases in the world where we have ongoing wars. And all those elements that you can see in this slide actually help us to prove that this system works well in Ukraine now. And if it works also in other countries, definitely the IMF will also be ready to work with them. However, this frame that was developed in 2022, 2023 and of the IMF needed to change the policy 4 times to be able to provide funding to Ukraine at war. So it's called landing and exceptional uncertainty frame, the so-called EHU frame. And it was of interest that when we were approaching this new program in September last year, and this is not public information, we had the first board of the IMF, at which the IMF said, okay, we want to accept this model for Ukraine for the next program. And some directors said, and why do you think that we need to have it? Let's first analyze everything. Let's first analyze whether this framework will really work. What, where was this frame used for the first time? What key takeaways we could have from it? And those of you who read the report of the IMF for 180 pages will see in Annex 1 or Annex 2, if I'm not mistaken, there is a document called Lessons Learned. In fact, this is the PRA, the peer review assessment, which was done not by the team, but by an external person who had a look at the program, how it worked, how many revisions we had, what results, what outcomes did we achieved. And then the IMF made this analysis, which was partly presented on November the 11th. And from September to November, we were working including during our annual meetings, towards persuading the directors into this and showing that this AHU frame should be used for Ukraine. So on November the 11th, it was finally approved, and then we went on. Another item, but in the slide, it's the third one, is called capacity to repay. What do we mean by capacity to repay? Capacity to repay assurances. In fact, the situation of war by itself shows that there is a high level of uncertainty in the country at war. That was one of the major problems in 2022 because the fund didn't know how to do the planning. Normally, the IMF programs do have a basic scenario. Inside that basic scenario, if the situation differs to a major extent, then you need to actually develop a new program because the program has only one basic scenario let down for it. And if this basic scenario shows that the program doesn't work, you have to create a different program. And you may have a look at the documents of the fund, in particular, in the first part where we speak on staff report, that we have the basic scenario and the downside scenario. By which I mean that there is a scenario showing what happens if the war lasts longer or there are more aggravated circumstances of the war. And this difference between the basic scenario and the downside or negative scenario actually creates what I consider to be a space for maneuvering for the fund in terms of policy implementation and for the Ukrainian authorities for maneuvering in between different scenarios. I don't have the slide for that. Maybe I will send it to Roman. But using that slide, you can see it, or you may have a look at 8 revisions of our program. You may see what the financial needs of the country were within the basic scenario and within the downside scenario. In 2023, we were following basic scenario 112 billion and the negative for 140 or 150 billion dollars. At the eighth scenario, it turned out that we had much higher needs, much higher than in the basic scenario, but still the program kept working because we had the funding, which was the second element. But high level of uncertainty leads to the situation when we have higher risks for the fund, because the country living in such circumstances will probably be unable to repay the money to the IMF. And we have this capacity to pay assurances showing that the country engaged in that program, if unable to repay the money, then a group of countries, a sufficiently large group of countries, will repay those costs. Well, of course, nobody expects that this will happen. In the Ukrainian reality, the reserve of the National Bank of Ukraine is 50 plus billion US dollars, and the maximum amount of the IMF program with due account of the excess limits of the fund is $16 billion. So it's more like a remote risk. But still, we have more than 15 countries belonging to that sufficiently large group, and you may have a detailed information in the staff report. There is a list of all countries that gave their assurances, and it's important to mention that all G7 countries provided their assurances, as well as European countries. This is important to remember. And I would like to stress here that G7 includes also the US. If the US, then Japan. So the Europeans were ready to do it from the start, but we had to work with the Americans for them to join in this capacity to repay assurances package. This is the second major part. The third part is that sustainability. And again, you may have a look at the staff report because it includes a section dedicated to some issues related to debt. And part of private sector after restructuring in the previous program is ready for that. And probably you remember that in the previous program, there were official creditors, which are the countries that provided funding to us, committed on two-step creditor strategy, extending a debt service standstill on comparative terms. It was supposed to happen in the last but one revision of the program that was supposed to take place at the end of 2026. But since we had a new program, we discussed it with creditors, what they would do with this, and they actually prolonged the standstill that currently exists, and they assured the IMF that they would keep acting in the same way. They did not reject their commitments regarding debt relief in Ukraine, for Ukraine, actually. This is the next part, and the fourth component is about conditionalities. You don't know that the IMF cannot provide funding to countries where there is an unfunded part in the budget. Probably you remember that in September there was a staff visit from the IMF, and the idea of this visit was to realize what the financial needs of Ukraine are. And we identified the amount needed by Ukraine was $136 billion. And starting with that point in time, the IMF, together with Ukrainian authorities, were trying to find some assurances coming from international partners that would help us to bridge this gap, because the IMF could provide only a certain share of this amount. That was not an easy task to do. I think that the recent announcement made by the Hungarian party uh, a week before the board meeting also raised this issue. But all the funding of Ukraine consists of several parts. For 4 years, we have got $136 billion. And if we divide it by three large parts inside, which will contain subparts as well. So for the year 28-29, you know that the EU and Ursula von der Leyen have promised that Ukraine would be included into the short-term budget of the EU with the amount of more than 100 euros. And the IMF made an agreement with the European Commission that some part of the money promised for 2028-2029 could be used to cover the financial needs of Ukraine within the IMF program for the year 2028-2029, which means that a part of those 100 billion euros have been allocated for 2028-2029. Then if we take the period 2026-2027, we already had some programs that we worked with, in particular Ukraine Facility and Nerolos. They worked well in 2023. So partly they also stayed for 2026, 2027. So these two things together helped us to cover some part of our needs, and therefore the amount that we had worked with from September, November was about $67 billion, including aid from the IMF. So actually we needed 60. And as you know, we worked quite a lot with the topic of loans. Seems to me that we had the latest talk in October on this topic. And when we had our annual meeting, everybody was sure that this would take place, that this would be done. And that came as a shock that this was not done during the meeting of the European Council in October. And again, the moment we passed through that stage, we started looking for a backup plan with the Europeans in trying to uh, bridge that gap. And therefore, in December, we managed on the 18th and 19th December, we found a way out because 30 million came for the budget and 60 million came for the military purposes, and also there is a part within that amount of 90 for the military budget funding. So in fact, this money was enough for us to bridge the gap that existed at that time. There is also a part of the money from the IMF, from the World Bank. So in that way, we managed to somehow secure these $136.5 billion to fund Ukraine. And then a week before the meeting of the board, the Hungarian side said that they would block 90 billion, in particular the part that was related to the budget. Let you have just several minutes left. Yes, I'm about to complete. So we worked on this topic with the European Commission. We did it during the week when we had the meeting of the board. We had a lot of consultations and we got their assurances that they are working towards this. And there are three things to be mentioned here. The first one is that this tool does exist. At least we do have the political assurances of this provided by the European Council. Also, this tool has already been legislated because it has been voted on in the European Parliament. And the item blocked by Hungary, well, this is already about the fulfillment of this financial conditionality by the EU. But they have told us that they would definitely find a solution, a way out of the problem, and this was enough for the IMF. And we have only the last item mentioned by Alexandra about conditionalities for the IMF program. In fact, the visit of Kristalina Georgieva in January was very helpful for us because she saw that Kyiv during the attacks in a very severe condition, and this allowed us to make another agreement regarding one of the previous measures. We transformed it into the structural beacon, and therefore in February we had the voting 24/1 with great support coming from most of the countries at the board meeting. And when I mentioned 24/1, well, you understand that not all the countries in the world, unfortunately, support Ukraine, but it was only Russia that voted against that, the way they've been doing for all the years that I've been working in the IMF. While all the other countries, including the ones where war has just launched, also voted in favor of this decision, in favor of supporting Ukraine, which is an interesting fact. Thank you. Sorry for taking too much of your time. Well, thank you, Vladislav. In fact, it's very important for us to understand this internal cuisine and the puzzles that were supposed to be put together for the new program to become possible. And because then at least this year we won't have any pain in the neck, major pain in the neck with the funding of the budget problems. So, colleagues, those who have just joined us, please let me mention that if you have any questions to our reporters, you may ask the questions in the chat or on the Q&A menu of the Zoom webinar. Then, Vlad, if possible, stay with us and we will go on. And now we are going over to the Ukraine facility plan. Uh, we would ask our speaker to tell us about the implementation of the indicators that, in the opinion of the consortium, seem to be the most difficult ones. So let me invite Vitaly Nabok, senior analyst of the Institute for Analytics and Advocacy. Please, Vitaly, over to you. Yes, good afternoon, dear colleagues. Thanks a lot for having me here. In my today's speech, I would like to focus on some issues related to the monitoring of Pillar 1 of Ukraine facility plan, which are the indicators as of the beginning of March this year. First of all, I would like to start with the key events that we had in February 2026. And let me mention that we can see a significant slowing down in the implementation of the reform indicators. And actually, we may this may result in significant problems for us because we have problems with four indicators. At least 10 indicators were supposed to be completed by the fourth quarter, by the end of the fourth quarter of 2025, and the amount here is 2.5 billion euros. So I think that this is quite an amount that could be used for the expenses that our country has, and this will be enough to ensure operation of the basic state functions for months. And let me also tell you that according to the EU acquis regarding Ukraine facility, we 1 year um, since the moment we created some delay in the performance of some indicator for catching up and for getting the money that we otherwise could have got in time. And now, based on the results of the first quarter 2026, we must say that Ukraine may, for the first time, lose this part of funding on an irreversible basis. Here I'm talking about the amount of 0.3 billion euros for non-fulfillment of the indicator of Ukraine facility regarding increase in the number of staff members of the High Anti-Corruption Court. And also, I would like to speak about the results of the first quarter of this year. So, out of 8 indicators that we would have to have completed by the end of quarter 1 2026, only one has been completed, and there are 5 indicators where we face some risks of non-implementation. And let's have a look at the situation in detail. So you can see the debts for the first to third quarter of 2025 amounting to almost 1.5 billion euros. And the worst situation is with the increase in the number of staff members of the High Anti-Corruption Court. As mentioned by me, and after the first part of the competition, the fast track procedure was announced, and now there is a new selection phase with special meetings of the High Qualification Commission of Judges together with the Public Council of International Experts. Those members of the commission will assess candidates in terms of their compliance with a number of criteria like integrity, origin of income, and correspondence of the lifestyle of candidates with the revenues declared. Then as far as the second quarter of 2025 is concerned, there were supposed to be some changes regarding revision of declarations, integrity declarations of judges and their vetting. And there was the work of Verkhovna Rada behind that, and we have received the Venice Commission's opinion. Another indicator is improvement of the enforcement of court decisions. So we have got the draft law, but there has been no progress with this draft law. It was adopted in the first reading, but then the discussion started regarding the contents of its provisions. And finally, we also have some problem issues with this draft law and its enforcement. This is as far as the second quarter is concerned. And for the third quarter, I need to mention adoption of legislation for the integration electricity package. And here we also got the draft law with a new deadline for the third quarter. But even with this deadline, it was not fulfilled. Let me take the largest group of indicators that have not been fulfilled. So the fourth quarter of 2025 is leading in terms of those indicators. You can see 10 of them, like 1.2 amendments to the legislation civil service, because we've got the draft law, but it was recalled and then an alternative draft law was submitted. There is no draft there is no even first reading regarding this draft law, and there is a lot of debate going on. Then 4.8, national risks assessment to be conducted by the State Monitoring Service. But again, there is a delay because the Ministry of Finance has submitted some suggestions and recommendations, and the body is processing them and does not manage to do it in time. Then PSO 6.7 indicate there is a draft law submitted by Luxemov-Chan, but there has been no first reading. Then 6.9, termination of the effect of the law on the state aid. There is a draft law, but we don't see any opinion of the profile committee on it. So we are also quite distant from having any decisions or any draft laws adopted as far as this indicator is concerned. Then 8.2, deregulation in specific sectors. We do have the specific draft law, but it was only adopted in the first reading. Then 10.3, improvement of permit procedures for investing into RES. So here we're talking about fast-track procedures for getting permits for investing into RES in compliance with the EU acquis. Again, the draft law was registered with the Parliament, but at the end of December, its consideration was postponed, which makes it impossible for us to comply with this indicator. Then 10.7, appointing NEMO. This is the mandate of NERC, but we've got some discussions regarding who should be appointed as NEMO, as the nominated market operator, because we've got some claims from the joint stock company called the market operator, and the discussion is going on as far as appointment and identification of this operator is concerned. And then 10.11, the special status of NERC, because there is a need for for coordinating the work of the regulator with a number of directives of the EU, and there is a draft government action program which contains the commitment on creating this framework for updating the status of NERC. And 10.14, support of development of effective, more sustainable district heating. In September last year, the draft law was also submitted, but there is the opinion of the profile committee, but there has been no first reading. And 11.3, ensuring interoperability of railway transport, which is an important reform aimed at setting the basic rules and ensuring traffic safety. So here we may tell that the draft law was submitted to the Verkhovna Rada at the end of October, but at the end of December it was adopted in the first reading, but we understand that there is no further progress. To put it simply, in the form of a diagram, we have tried to consolidate all this information using the examples of the same indicators, but we can see that out of the 10 commitments that we had in the fourth quarter, 8 now this in the format of draft laws of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, which need to be further approved, and there are also 2 decisions that need to be taken by central executive authorities. This is the one related to the National Risk Assessment 4.8 and NEMO appointment for electricity market 10.7. And at the end of my presentation, I would also like to tell a couple of words about the prospects of the first quarter of 2026. As mentioned, here we also have a great delay, significant delay as far as the pace of fulfillment of indicators is concerned. We have got only 5.1 fulfilled. The other ones are in progress, but there are 5 risky indicators. The one, 3.7, on enactment of the law on fast-tracked insolvency procedures for SMEs. There is the draft law in place, but it was registered in the Verkhovna Rada only on the 10th of February, which means that we have to understand that we will still need a lot of time for its consideration. Vitaly, only 1 minute left. Okay, this is also legislation on transparent selection of prosecutors, and there is no draft law submitted to the parliament. We've got only the draft coming from the Cabinet of Ministers, also 8.5, securing connection to engineering grids, no draft law submitted to the parliament. Then 9.3, better distribution of mandate of local authorities. There is a draft law, but nothing was done by the Verkhovna Rada as yet. And another one, development of the strategy of circular economy. Public hearing is taking place on this draft law, but there are so many comments that there is a risk that there will be delays in the implementation. In general, let me tell that with no effective dialogue and interaction between the parliament and the cabinet of ministers of Ukraine, we will further have this negative situation with the implementation of the Ukraine facility indicators. That's why I think that during our discussion today, we will try to fix some problem issues that arise around those indicators in particular. Thank you. Thank you, Vitaly. Let me remind you that all the materials, including the presentation itself, with a detailed description of both beacons and indicators, you can already find on the website of Dixie Group, and it will also be available on the website of the consortium. And colleagues in the chat have provided to you with specific links. The English version will soon be prepared, but along with that, let me ask you to understand what the situation is like, because the text of the program of cooperation with the IMF appeared in the night from Thursday to Friday, so the consortium experts had to work over the weekend to scrutinize it, divide it into molecules, and to describe all those things. Therefore, the Ukrainian version is already there, but the English version of the presentation is not yet there, but we will try to work on it as soon as possible. Now, let me go over to the part which is related to the interim outcomes of Ukraine facility over the period of 2 years. And Taras Kachka, Vice Prime Minister, actually asked to say sorry. He unfortunately will not be able to join us because the hostilities in the Middle East uh, resulted in some logistic problems for him. He was staying in Cyprus and he's got some logistic issues. Otherwise, he cannot arrive. Also, the Daria Marchak, Deputy Minister of Economy, has failed to come, but for some considered valid reasons. But we have Yulia Sharipova from the Ministry of Economy. We've also got Vadim Halaychuk, MP of Ukraine and first deputy chairperson of the Committee of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine on integration of Ukraine and the EU. And we've also got Henrik Wittfeldt, who is the head of the Department of Public Finance, Support of Business and Social Policy from the EU delegation to Ukraine. So before we start our panel discussion, I would give the floor to the analyst of Dixie Group, Alona Korohkot, for her to show several slides that will act as intriguing slides to activate our discussion. So Alona, welcome. Yes, thank you, Roman. Welcome, colleagues. Let me try to quickly cover the key slides focusing on the progress in the implementation of Ukraine facility plan by all components. So within component 1, pillar 1, Ukraine has received 26.8 billion euros, which is about 70% of the planned amount. However, the lion's share of this funding was the one provided back in 2024. Thanks to transitional and unconditional funding, as plus successful implementation of indicators planned for the quarter 2, quarter 4 of 2024. In 2025, the load increased considerably. We can see the peak in the number of indicators. It increased by and reached 56, while in 2024 we had 31. You can see the infographics with the revision of the Ukraine facility plan initiated by the government of Ukraine in August 2025. And the timelines were revised, some indicators were postponed, but this does not lead to the acceleration of implementation. Therefore, the dynamics in 2024 was slower in terms of payments and increased the gap between the planned and planned money and transferred money. And of course, we applied the partial payment methodology. If we speak about Pillar 2 of Ukraine facility plan, it is actively being developed within the investment framework. And as for now, there has taken place distribution of almost 7 billion euros, which is about 73% of the envisaged amount of money. 58% are public sector projects and 42% is the money envisaged for the private sector. We've got more than 25 IMF, 25 FI programs at the implementation stage, and we expect to mobilize more than 21 billion euros of investment. Also, funding of about 20 plus programs has been already approved for the amount of 3 billion euros. They are going to be launched in 2026, but when we speak about performance and efficiency, it's rather low, lower than the expectations, and the ratio on this mobilization is 1 to 3.1 against the planned 1 to 4.2. And all in all, the capacity is to engage up to 40 billion euros of investment, but achievement of this indicator depends on the speed of program implementation and investment activeness. And if we speak about Pillar 3, which is about routine operations, so here we're talking about technical aid, funding, following some international mechanisms. Also, these are grants, direct procurement, indirect management beneficiaries. In particular, we can be talking about technical cooperation facility, which includes grants and direct procurement, indirect management, as well as compensation of payments related to debt instruments. Let's say in 2024, within Pillar 3, 488 million euros was transferred. This is the contributions to Ukraine Energy Support Fund, some ULIDA, and Ukraine for EU projects. In 2025, the amount was 790 million euros, and it should be indicated that uh, in that year, that also included some percentage from the frozen Russian assets. Uh, then we have the updated program for 2026-2027, and the overall amount is 2.3 billion. A part of them will be used to cover the borrowing costs. Thank you. Thank you, Alona, for this important helicopter view of all the three pillars. It's important to remember that besides Ukraine facility plan, there are two more components of the program, and we are trying to stay updated all the time and keep up with the times. But when we are talking about the interim results of 2 years, I would like to ask Yulia Shaipova. Um, the Ministry of Economy is a coordinator. It plays an important role in the coordination of the Ukraine facility plan. And in the context of this rule, what are the indicators that are the most difficult from the point of view of this interagency cooperation between different branches of authorities? Because Vitaly has mentioned how important it is to secure good cooperation between the parliament and the government. So this is my first question, and the second question is, where is the right balance between the efficiency of reforms and the speed of reforms? Because we know that some projects, some acts do not fully comply to with what was envisaged by the program in general, and they are not fully compliant with the EU acquis. Thank you, Roman. Thank you for the invitation. So our deputy minister, um, uh, Darina Marchak, has a meeting with the minister. That's why she failed to join us today, and I will try to answer your question. So getting back to your presentation, in trying to reflect upon the steps that we have taken and that in the commitments that we have not fulfilled regarding the Ukraine facility. Okay, well, we have not yet submitted the report for the fourth quarter 2025. We will still have 2 weeks of sessions in the parliament by the end of March when we are going to submit the report. So we hope that we will still manage to have something done. And as you've mentioned, we have some non-legislative steps, and we also hope that we will manage by the end of March to do some extra things. And the hope is that the results for the fourth quarter will look a little bit better than they look now in the slide. So let me speak on the draft laws where we still have some chances. One of the and the ones where we don't have any chances. So one of the draft problems, draft laws where we are faced with challenges is about the electricity integration package, which is very important because it introduces new rules for the electricity market, and more than 1,000 amendments have been submitted to it. They are being processed by the committee, and we expect the opinion of the committee before the draft law is submitted for the first reading, for the reading in the parliament. But in fact, it is quite realistic to still have this law adopted within the timeline, by the deadline set. I'm not talking about political will, just about realistic timeline. Also, if we have this law adopted, it comes as a package with the law on Indicator 10.7, so probably they will go together. Then here is another key requirement of our European integration track as far as anti-monopoly legislation is concerned. It's also a tricky one, and for quite a period of time we have been discussing it with our partners from the government, from the European Commission, regarding the support provided by the state to SMEs, whether to discuss whether some derogations for our business could be introduced in times of war or not. And this also was a difficult process. And we also have indicator 1.2, which has been prepared for the first reading. And we hope that it's going to be on the agenda. At least we are trying to put it on the agenda, but we are the hostages of the situation in the Verkhovna Rada now, not specifically as related to facility projects, but in general, as far as the voting process in the Verkhovna Rada is concerned. It's not something that really depends on us at this stage. We have always been trying to coordinate any meaningful issues related to content, but some things are out of our control, like the number of deputies or of MPs staying in the parliament to participate in the voting process. So that's what the situation looks like. As far as and here is something that you were not asking for, but let me tell you about the money that we could potentially lose. In fact, we have quite a lot of time still to somehow catch up with everything. So the most difficult one here is selection and appointment of judges for the High Anti-Corruption Court. And when the draft law is in the parliament, then we can no longer affect what is happening to that. And this is exactly what the story is with the steps within this domain, that is the mandate of some independent bodies or separate authorities, like the judiciary in this case. So why did it happen so? Because there was a selection process with all the procedures well approved by the European Commission. So we did everything in time with that, but unfortunately, we didn't get a sufficient number of candidates who passed, and we had to relaunch the competition, the selection process. We hope that by the end of spring it will be completed. We still have time by the beginning of summer because we've got 11 months or 12 months for fulfillment from the moment of time that we get the notice that the step has not been fulfilled. And the report is never submitted at the end of the quarter. Several weeks later, then there is some time over which the European Commission has to do its assessment. So it actually adds up some time to this implementation or enforcement period. We hope that we will still be okay with this draft law. But some draft laws, like the one on integrity of judges and digitalization of judicial procedures, so these draft laws are still with the Verkhovna Rada, and we hope that we will manage to find a way out of this debt and situation. Getting back to your question regarding how we could find the balance between the speed and the quality of reforms, it's a good question. And I think that Daria would be a better person to answer this question. But I would say that it's important for us to uh, uh, keep a very good contact between Ukraine facility and our authorities. And we need to link all our commitments to our European integration plan because it's like the main track for us in the development and the reforms in all the areas. So it's important to clearly see this connection between Ukraine facility and our European integration pathway. So we need to understand what steps of Ukraine facility are performed in order to meet their commitments within the European integration pathway. Also, one of the challenges in our way is that quite often our MPs claim that as they think they have not been engaged significantly as or sufficiently in the development of draft laws. This is something we should probably pay attention to. We try to arrange different meetings with chairpersons and of committees and uh, the management of the or the chairpersons of the Verkhovna Rada, but that's a lesson learned that it's difficult to do this. Okay, please, I'm reminding our participants that you may ask questions in the Q&A box or in the chat. The role of the parliament has been mentioned. So let me give the floor to Vadim as the representative of the committee, who is actually watching the process of compliance with the EU acquis in all the initiatives. So, Vadim, what do you think about the degree of engagement of the parliament in the implementation of Ukraine facility? And do you also think that now it's quite difficult to vote on those reforms, to ensure voting on those reforms? Yes, thanks for having me here. Welcome, dear participants. It's a very timely event, and this initiative is very timely. There has been deep analysis made of the problems, of the debts that we have accumulated. So I will not focus on all those things. And my special thanks go to the project for collecting such consolidated information because it's really important to have this comprehensive analysis and a regular update of this analysis. This data helps us in the parliament as well. We are checking whether we're on the same page and we are checking what we should spend energy, resources, and political will on in order to solve some problematic issues. We in the parliament realize how important Ukraine facility is. We also understand how important it is to have timely adoption of different draft laws to ensure a timely funding for the state budget. We also do regular analysis and we have meetings to discuss the debts that we have got and the steps to be taken. But we are very grateful to all those who are engaged in this process because this sort of comprehensive analysis is always better. It's always useful to get together all the arguments, the reasoning, and to understand why we need to move quicker in this or that area. And here we should speak on priorities. Last Friday, we had a large meeting here in the Committee on European Integration. Taras Kachka presented at that meeting the current situation, the status quo, as far as our European integration is. And the members of the committees asked, what is our priority as for now? What should be done today, tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow? He said, everything. I cannot tell you that this is our priority and this is not our priority. Everything is a priority. And by the way, it's very good that you combine the discussion of Ukraine facility with the discussion of the IMF program because there are a lot of overlapping things, and this is also something that indicates to us that we've got a number of important projects. We have lists of draft laws that need to be adopted, and from time to time, there appears a question, logical question, what is our priority? What should be our priority? And how coordinated do we stay as far as certain issues are concerned? So getting back to the situation in the parliament, I have to tell that on the one hand, we have the situation when the political will here in the parliament is definitely is there. Um, It represents the political will of the Ukrainian nation that speaks in favor of EU integration. So there is no opposition to the EU integration. There is not a single faction in the parliament that claims that it is in opposition to the EU integration process. But these are statements, these are declarations, and I will get back to this a little bit later. But it has already been mentioned today that we have the so-called capacity of the parliament. In fact, not many of us do realize how difficult a situation we now have with the parliament, with the composition of the parliament. If I am not mistaken, we've got 494 MPs, which includes the MPs who, for a number of reasons, have not been in the country for a period of time. There is no time to discuss why so, but that's a fact. These are tens of MPs who are no longer in the country and then are not present. In this situation, we need to have this majority within a limited composition of the parliament, which has become a serious challenge for the management of the parliament, for the heads of and chairpersons of committees, of factions, of groups. It's already a systemic problem, and well, we may discuss what we can do about that if there is any time left. In this situation, definitely it's becoming important to ensure the right coordination. Well, first of all, coordination between the government, the parliament, the president, and our partners, the European Commission, the European Parliament, in terms of our approaches to our priorities, approaches to the agenda. And we regularly have some draft laws that we get with, and these are draft laws with some provisions that are rather tricky and disputable. They are controversial, and certain categories of people to whom this draft law is related, like judges or prosecutors, try to advocate their opinions. They are not very happy about the provisions of those draft laws. And then we get the situation when we are looking for someone who actually developed those commitments without asking the judges and the prosecutors, let's say, just in an example. And we're trying to find out whether these commitments that were once undertaken can really be fulfilled or not. And here I have to mention that recently there has been a significant deterioration in terms of the Parliament's approach to its work with the European integration laws. Yes, we've got lists of draft laws with flags, as we call them, with the EU flags, and we are trying to rank the priorities. This is one thing. But until recently, we had a taboo, and the political opposition to the EU integration laws. I mean that as far as those laws were concerned, no one was tried to be in opposition because of the internal political agenda. But unfortunately, I have to state that now, even those draft laws are on the general list, and political will is there. The political priorities of a certain faction are put in the form of the requirements that actually run counter to the adoption of those draft laws. Last week, I think we had a very negative example, which I hadn't seen for years. It was more like sabotage or diversion. And I can speak here because we have experts present. We've got people who know what European integration is like and what political situation is like in Ukraine. I think that we need to pay attention to something that happened last week because we need to work in order to prevent such situations from happening or to learn how to work with them. Um, I will briefly explain what happened. There was a draft law 0360. It was on the improvement of the road network, and everybody understand that we have an agreement, financial agreement with the AIB, and everybody understands how important all those things are. There is no opposition, there are no comments regarding this draft law and the need for adopting it. But we had a situation when the Speaker of the Parliament started the signal voting before the real voting of this draft law. And in the signal voting, we had about 235 votes. And after the signal voting, just several seconds later, there was the real voting on the draft law, and it got 225 votes, which means that one of the factions, even in the name of which there is the word European, consciously, absolutely consciously, did not vote in favor. I don't know why, but it was done on purpose. So the signal voting showed a higher rate, but in this real voting, this faction did not give all its votes in favor of this draft law. I don't know again what the considerations for that are. Some people say that the authorities are sometimes introducing provisions into the draft law which are running counter to the interests of the internal agenda. But here, there were no such provisions for sure. So I don't know why it so happened, but well, unfortunately, I have to end up with this negative note. It seems to me that this is one of the key reasons. In words, all the factions in the parliament claim that they are ready to politically support the EU integration, but in fact, indeed, we see some actions that probably require attention from the society and response from the society. We also work with our partners because, as you know, there is such an approach, or probably it's not an approach, but the wording that this is the draft law approved by our European partners. But what kind of approval is it? Do we have a letter from the European Commission? Is there any opinion of a certain representative of the European Commission? So we definitely need to have some coordination with the European Commission, and there is a lot of improvement for this because it's really true that sometimes the documents are lacking. Well, suppose the European Commission is quite often delaying the decisions. It takes quite a time for them to pass a decision, and it's quite difficult to get from them a document that would really be entitled like this, the approval of the certain draft law. Actually, it this letter of approval cannot come. There is no such document as such, or otherwise it would take too much. But colleagues sometimes ask us to show such letters of approval. So to wrap up, let me tell that in the we will have the votes that would be enough to work with the debts, with those delayed draft laws. Really, we still have some time, and the agreement with the partners says that we will have enough time to liquidate all those so-called debts. And the parliament has already shown many a time that it's ready to do things when it's really necessary, and we managed to find a sufficient number of votes in a very quick way to adopt the decisions that were absolutely required. On my part, I can tell you that the committee where I work and the faction, the Servant of People, is really monitoring everything that is happening in terms of our European integration commitments, in particular the ones dealing with budget replenishment and other ones are concerned. We also try to all the time to stay on alert to keep updated. And let me express once more our gratitude to expert for helping us a lot in settling those issues and highlighting everything in time and developing everything in time. Thank you. Thank you for them. Thank you for your political assessment, including political assessment in the parliament. And on our part, we are ready to go on with highlighting all those problematic issues that we think to be problematic, or the ones that really are problematic in the opinion of others. You have mentioned the European Commission, and here I, not just as a facilitator, but just as a person, need to give the floor to Henrik Whitfeldt. I just cannot but give the floor to him. Maybe, Henrik, you will respond to the comments that you have heard regarding how the green lights should be given to some priorities, to some draft laws, some initiatives as approved ones. But actually, my question for you is different. What is your assessment of the implementation of Ukraine facility over the period of 2 years of its existence? You're welcome.
Thanks a lot, Roman, and thanks for inviting me to this event. So, yeah, no, I also wanted to start there and take a step back. So, I think the ambition when the Ukraine plan or the Ukraine facility and the Ukraine plan was adopted in 2024 was to create macroeconomic stability and predictability on financing supports for this 4-year period, and also to support the Ukraine plan that is a growth plan of Ukraine. And I think in the first 2 years, we have been succeeding in doing exactly that. So out of 38 billion, 26 or almost 27 billion has already been dispersed. And 63 indicators has been fulfilled in related to a large number of different reforms. So I would say in this first 2 years, the implementation has been successful and generated the objectives that we had in the beginning. So, but of course, times is changing. So and the conditions are also changing. So the Ukraine plan, or the pillar 1 of the Ukraine facility, was very much front loaded, which means that for 2026 and 27. Given the changing conditions, the war is still going on. The financing needs of Ukraine is still very high, so that this was not enough to cover the financing needs, as was described by Vladislav and colleagues. So then we have now on the table the Ukraine support loan of 90 additional billion that will partly then build on the Ukraine facility and cover the financing needs, or at least a significant part of the financing needs for 26 and 27. So, but that's I think it's not so strange that we are having another different situation 2 years later after such a detailed plan was foreseen. So there were some revisions of the Ukraine plan that was done in the autumn of 2027. But I would say was fine-tuning language of some indicators, and there were also some changes in timeline, etc. But I think that it's given the situation right now, especially the financing situation, the increasing financing need, that this is not enough. So I think what we will foresee now, when eventually the Ukraine support plan will be approved by the European or the Council of the European Union, that there will be another revision of the Ukraine plan to incorporate different set of, or maybe not a different set of conditionality, but strengthening of some part of the conditions in the existing Ukraine plan that is most relevant for the time being. And I think what also happened in these last 2 years is an increasing focus and also speed and ambition level when it comes to European integration on the European accession process. So I think we will foresee and stronger emphasis in the revised Ukraine plan on the Ukraine's EU accessions agenda. So I think this is what we have, but on top of that, we're not foreseeing that there will be any totally new conditions that are coming from our side. What we're talking about is existing commitments. So we have on the rule of law side, which will continue to be an important part of continued conditionality. We have the 10-point plan that was agreed late last year, and we have the energy action plan when it comes to the energy reforms. We also have the enlargement process that is now in general like having a number of different benchmarks to be able to open and close chapters and things related to the rule of law roadmap. So there are a lot of existing conditionality out there, and we don't foresee that will be a big change. So I think thanks a lot, Vadim and Yula, for explaining the difficulties you're facing right now. So of course, we all knew that the quarter four 2025 will be very difficult quarter or installment to fulfill all the conditionalities. There are 20 different conditions. Half of them are legislative and demands the approval of the Rada. So it's clear that this would be difficult. So and as Vadim described, thanks a lot for this, the difficulties that you're not facing in the Rada. So of course, from our side, there are expectations that the Rada will be able to implement these commitments that has been done. So and then as Yule was saying, so it's better to do it earlier because of the financing needs, but it doesn't mean that money is lost. So they are a 12 months period after the conditions is in the Ukraine plan to still have disbursement of funds, and we see this is already happening of some of the conditions that was delayed in 2025, for example on the Arma law or the decentralization law, that payments or disbursements will take place at the later stage. So I think that's. So I think that's where we are when it comes to the implementation of the plan as such. If you want to say some words on the questions Vadim was raising on giving a green light from the Commission, I think from our side, the best way, the best process would be that there are close coordination between the Commission and the Ukraine government in the preparation of European integration draft laws. We also have significant technical assistance available in most or all of these areas. So they are a good possibility to do that. And after that, the draft law will be sent to the Rada. So then the Rada will know that everything related to European integration has already been green lighted by the Commission. But I'm aware that sometimes these are very complicated laws. So I now, for example, working myself on the new customs code, which is a very complicated legislation, or the new labor code is very complicated legislation. So it takes significant time for the Commission to provide their assessment of these laws. So and I think that's normal. And given the ambition level of Ukraine and the speed these laws are being sent to Parliament, and that hopefully then will be adopted in first reading relatively soon. But then it means that you also need to find ways of working together with the Parliament. So all three partners here to ensure that these laws are in line with commitments. But that's also something that is taking place within the technical discussions slash negotiations of the different chapters of the accession process, which are then have started in 3 clusters, and there also will be 3 other clusters that technical discussions will start very soon. There was, I think I assume that Taras Kachka was in Cyprus for participating in this meeting there, where one of the decisions to be taken was to start or take a decision to start technical discussions on the 3 remaining clusters. So, but unfortunately, this has been cancelled because of the war in the Middle East. But we expect that this decision to be taken soon, and that closing benchmark will be shared with the Ukrainian side on the remaining three chapters. So if I should say some words in the end on the state of play of the Ukraine support loan, so the Vladislav Rashkova was explaining how that fits into the IMF strategies. Of course, there's very close coordination going on between the Commission, the IMF, and also the World Bank on Ukraine's financing needs. So the ambition is that the Ukraine support loan will cover 2/3 of the financing gap for the next 2 years. And there are now ongoing discussions on the financing strategy of Ukraine for the next 2 years to understand when and how much would be needed for the different parts of the Ukraine support loan. So as you know, this consists of 3 parts. One is the defense part, and then the second one is budget support, and the budget support is divided in 2 parts. One is the like additional funding to the Ukraine facility, and the second part is there will be a macro financial assistance program where the macro financial assistance program should be able to disperse earlier than the an additional funding to the Ukraine facility. So these discussions are now ongoing, but hopefully first the disbursement should be able to take place in April, and also then overcoming the additional difficulties that was created in the council in relation to get all the agreements necessary for adopting the Ukraine for support loan regulation. So thanks.
Thank you, Henrik. So let me have a clarifying question. You were asking about enhancing of specific indicators or commitments within the Ukraine plan. Do we get it right that by enhancing, you mean attaching some additional meaning to them as far as finance is concerned that could support our budgets? So is it related to finance?
I did not fully understand the question here. The translation was a little bit difficult, but you understand. You want to ask what is the scope of the new conditions in relation to the additional funding in the Ukraine plan? So there will be additional conditions related to the Ukraine support loan, and part of that will be then added to the Ukraine facility. That means that there will be some new conditions, and there will be some parts that will be top up probably of existing conditions. But these are discussions that will take place in the next month, because they will also, as I mentioned, be part of a revision, further revision of the Ukraine plan, to also fine tune it to this specific situation right now, and focus on the most important reforms, especially then for the European accession process.
Yes, thank you for this clarification or specification, because we can see that Ukraine plan is a rather dynamic document, and we will have some discussions to have the revision of it. So my question actually was related to that. Okay, thank you. Here is the Q&A part coming now. So let me remind you once again that you can write on the Q&A menu, or you make us your questions in the chat. So far, I don't see any questions. That's why I will probably give a chance to our speakers and experts to ask other speakers some questions. Please, if you have any clarifying questions, feel free to. Yes, thank you. I can also see some question coming from Alexandra Bitli. So first a comment, if I may. So Vadim, when you were talking, you said that still have got some time left, but we have a problem because the Ministry of Finance does the budgeting, understanding it that all the indicators are performed in time. And when 3 million is coming in the fourth quarter this year, but not in the first quarter this year or in the fourth quarter last year, because 3 million or 4 million for the budget is quite a large amount of money that could be spent on funding salaries or social assistance for IDPs and other vulnerable categories of population. Uh, Today, our partner aid normally is spent on military expenses. That's why we have those delays in the social area. And Julia has mentioned that they have not yet submitted the report to the European Commission, which means that the money will arrive in the best case possible at the end of September, and there will be probably first 1 billion, not 3 billion. So we need to find the money to cover this gap. So what I would like to stress is that we don't need to think that we have 1 year to fulfill the indicator and not lose the money. We should treat it from a different point of view. We need to get this money now, here and now, to really provide for the funding from the budget, because this is important for economic resilience. This is about education and healthcare in particular. Therefore, we cannot postpone it, taking into account the fact that we have a year for implementation. We need this money now. And we need to be clear about our focus and predictions. Otherwise, we will have this gap and we will not know how to finance all those gaps with healthcare, with education, social area. But I really do hope that in the parliament, MPs will understand how important it is to have all those draft laws adopted for the sake of indicator fulfillment. And we are going to the EU. We would like to become a member of the EU in 2030, but we need to have decisions passed. We cannot fulfill even several indicators of the Ukraine plan. We cannot approve in time all the decisions for the World Bank that are European integration decisions. And for the European integration, we will have to adopt hundreds of laws that are going to be more difficult than the ones we are now considering. So we will have so many debts that there may be a real problem, which would be a disaster. So I hope that there will be better coordination between the government and the Parliament, and the European Commission will be engaged in that process for it to show the red flags, the red lines, and to uh, share its messages with MPs. Well, thank you, Alexandra. We would really like to have an ideal scenario, but the world is not ideal and perfect. That's why we have those regular meetings and regular discussions where we are trying to highlight the urgency of sudden decisions that need to be passed already here and now. Does anyone have an answer to this comment or any feedback? If you allow me, it's a really good comment. Well, definitely, I meant the structure of Ukraine facility and what annual determinants we managed to agree upon with our partners. But you're absolutely right. Everybody understands that absence of physical money, physical trenches is a real problem for us because we need money here and now. That's what I was talking about. It's not that in the parliament somebody is not aware of this problem. Everybody knows about it. But nevertheless, we've got what we've got. And the example I gave you is highly indicative. Um, Probably it's not the right place where we could scrutinize the situation, but I gave this example not just to complain what difficult life MPs have. No, we just have to work on that. Voters, constituencies have to work with political parties, with their MPs. Experts need to work with them because the results of voting on every European integration draft law are available on the website of the Verkhovna Rada. Let analysts take a standpoint of a certain deputy, a certain MP, and a certain faction or party let's have a look at the voting pattern and let's ask him questions why he has not voted in favor of this or that draft law. So we need to work with MPs. Um, the political situation is really difficult. It's really difficult for us to work, and that's when we understand why we should have elections every 4 to 5 years. But under the conditions that we have now, the only way out is to really actively work with MPs. And it is voters, experts, and our partners who should work with MPs for the MPs to understand that they need to participate in the voting process. The parliament is capable of voting on all the draft laws in time. We used to have a certain period of time when we managed to do it, so we should get back to that stage, but we just need to spend the resources in the right way and to be focused on something common. I can see that there are some questions from the room, so let me ask this round to answer. So let me read out the all the three of them. How can CSOs use the resources of Ukraine Facility Program? Maybe experts are ready to answer. And the next question is on the expected revision of the program, or rather of Ukraine plan. Uh, then what steps would be left there, what steps would be removed from this plan, and how this could affect funding. And the third question is about the development and funding of the single project portfolio of the state for this year. So the question is, what do we need to do to take into account the Ukraine facility ideology when developing the single project portfolio, in particular as far as capacity building is concerned and SME support. So here are three questions. If anyone is ready to answer, you're welcome. Yulia, you're welcome. I think that we may start with the question regarding the changes in the plan because this is something everybody must be interested in. In fact, the changes in the plan are envisaged by the structure of Ukraine facility. We have already done it once, as mentioned. It's an annual procedure which differs from the IMF revision procedure a little bit, but anyway, we are approaching a new cycle when we are to introduce changes. I don't think that any of the steps will be excluded because during the previous revision phase, we didn't cross out anything, we didn't remove anything, we just changed the timelines. And this was not only as far as timelines forward are concerned, but timelines backwards. I mean, that we shortened the timeline. So I think that that is something that will happen with this revision. Maybe there will be some steps added the way it has been envisaged by the new regulation on Ukraine support loan on this 19 billion. But this is still too early a stage to be able to speak in detail about what it's going to look like. When may we expect those discussions? When will they be happening? Well, our European colleagues have promised that as far as Ukraine support loan is concerned, there will be more clarity in September when they have the architecture of the distribution of this money approved, and then we will understand what will go via the Ministry of Finance and what will go through Ukraine facility because it's still not clear or rather, not the Ministry of Finance, but macro-financial support. We just need to understand that the level of ambition of our steps should not be going down. We still need to take very complex and urgent and relevant steps and reforms. And in this respect, we need to show how dedicated we are to the reforming process. Well, thank you, Alexandra. Welcome. As far as the first question is concerned, so the third pillar of Ukraine facility deals with civil society. So just have a look on the websites of the European EU delegation and the right number of indications about the Ukraine facility, and there you may find the answer to your question. Regarding what Julia said, Ukraine's support loan, regardless of how much will be allocated via Ukraine facility and how much will go through micro financial help, these anyway are going to be some conditionalities, some conditions. And our Prime Minister, Yulia Sviridenko, probably was saying about a different thing. At least I interpreted it that way. We have the status of some resolutions of the Cabinet of Ministers that are called experimental. So, in fact, something that is being done should be adopted by the law, but it's regulated by a certain resolution that is valid for 2 years, and over that period of time, the draft law is being developed and approved. So maybe that would be the right approach, and we are expecting one of such decisions for one of our indicators, but I think that there will be more of such approaches because it's easier for the government to have resolutions adopted than to make the parliament to have the draft law adopted. I don't know whether it's a correct approach, but this is something that will be happening. And as far as the reform of the system of public investment is concerned, in the IMF program, when risks are prescribed, there is the risk called reform fatigue, which states that the average likelihood, though our today's discussion would show that this is high likelihood, but it claims that the status there is average or medium uh, likelihood. But they there we have ownership, which is the main challenge. If we speak about public investment management system, we used to have the leader of the reform. Now the leader is not there, so the reform is slowing down, but it's still going on. So that is a risk. If we have a look at Mykola's question, we do have a table of consolidated projects. We have it on the website of the Ministry of Finance, and you may have a look at what has been supported for funding. Now, amendments to the single project portfolio of the state are being prepared, and many communities and ministry um, are working together towards this. And this project portfolio is actually based on the priority list, which is a document already approved. It just seems to me that at the moment we really have too many priorities. So we need to identify the so-called priorities because we cannot disperse and scatter our effort and money on everything. But the key thing here is that, well, you said that there is no capacity building and development opportunities for SMEs, but single project portfolio is not just about supporting SMEs. Uh, we have Pillar 2 of Ukraine facility, which speaks directly on supporting single project portfolio. Seems to me that these projects are rather different. They are infrastructural projects, and any infrastructural projects, in fact, is important for business because that means better access to some infrastructural facilities, better roads, better bridges, or some other buildings. So I would differentiate between these two. Thank you, Julia. A comment? Yes, let me also comment upon question 1 and question 3 because they tend to overlap a little bit, and Alexandra has already started speaking about capacity. It's more about pillar 3. And the money in civil society organizations is the money coming within Pillar 3. It comes through the EU delegations, the technical aid programs. And in the presentation, we already heard that there is a special frame for technical aid for the year 2026-2026. So this is the funding that is envisaged for capacity development and capacity building. If we speak about a single project portfolio. Um, Alexandra has also mentioned that mostly we deal with this in the field of investment, but the money could be spent on transport, education, and healthcare. And our task as a coordinator is just to trace whether those sectors mentioned by me are envisaged in the single project portfolio when it's being developed. This project portfolio is being supported, but not via the well, we have via the same channel. in general, as a coordinator, we just have to follow it that the budget has some allocations of money for specific needs. And the main problem with all this is that the selection of projects is taking place for quite a period of time. It may so happen that there is money in the budget, but the distribution for projects takes place in the summertime in the best case possible. And when the money starts arriving, that's already the end of the year and some money is not used. So that is a very high risk. But globally, that works approximately following this procedure. Yes, thank you, Julia. We know that there is the public investment reform and we have midterm plans. We can never limit ourselves to one year. Well, maybe we'll have a separate discussion of this pillar two and single project portfolio. But now we're pressed for time, and let me do the wrap up. I would like to express my gratitude to the experts of the consortium and to all the panelists. Thank you for coming here. Thank you for joining us and discussing those issues. For us, 2 years of Ukraine facility is not just a symbolic period and a symbolic date. It's an opportunity to have a look at in retrospect in order to discuss how we could add up some dynamics in the process, including in the parliament, how we could improve the quality of decisions, because this is also one of the problems that we sometimes hear both from MPs and from experts. And this, this discussion was also meant to think it over together, how to prevent such delays from happening for the external funding on which Ukraine is critically dependent in times of war to arrive on regular basis, and for us not to have those major gaps or these threats that there will be no funding coming for the most critical items of our expenditure and of our budget. Well, thank you. I would like to once again express my gratitude to all the speakers, to all the participants. Thanks a lot for finding some time to join us. And I would also like to express my gratitude to the Dixie Group team and to the interpreters for making this event technically possible. I would also like to express my gratitude to the International Renaissance Foundation for the support that it has been providing to all the four entities for us to be able to go on to progress and to contribute to the promotion of the reforms that we all as a Ukrainian nation need. And because for these reforms, we will get some perks in the form of financial aid, credits, and loans, which also important for our state to function and to develop in times of war. So we need this, but we will also get additional perks for those reforms. So thanks again to all of you. The materials will be available on the website, and together with the recording, all the presentations will be sent out to our registered participants, and we will also prepare the English version of slides as soon as possible. And let's see each other next time.